Let's build a positive environment. Hello, everyone. Welcome to YouTube. So I'm here today at the Lewis Army Museum with, who's this guy? Is it the director of the Lewis Army Museum, Eric Flint? Indeed it is.
Well, yes, it is. Hello, Internet land. This is Eric Flint, the director of the Lewis Army Museum, with Chris Staudinger of Pretty Gritty Tours, as well as my dear friend Evan Myseum, the wandering historian.
You should definitely go check out his channel. Today we're doing a little exploration of the museum today. We were live on TikTok, but they shut us down because we showcased weapons in a historic, curated setting. We appealed that decision.
Interestingly, I'm now live on Instagram, so if you can't find Chris on TikTok, or sorry, YouTube, because we just got suspended on TikTok, how's it feel being in jail?
It's not my first time and I'm okay with it.
Okay. I'm live on Instagram, and we're going to keep going, and you know what? We're going to try to not show the weapons at all, right, Chris?
That's not my policy and I'm not doing it.
No, I mean, really, we're not showing the weapons at all, are we?
Absolutely not.
Hey guys, why don't we look at a women's physical training dress from the 1940s?
There's no way this can go wrong.
Another one of my favorite things is here.
If we get suspended for this one, I'm going to be mad.
The Women's Army Corps during the Second World War. This particular uniform tends to get a lot of attention. It is a seersucker fabric, but it is in fact was the physical training uniform for women during the Second World War. And I've had a number of female soldiers come through, and once they get over kind of the initial laughter, then some of them go, that just looks really comfortable. But the seersucker uniform is, hey, what's going on?
No, I'm good.
No worries, no worries. For those of you that weren't here for the earlier cast, we just had a ceremony here at the museum celebrating the 105th anniversary of the founding of the 7th Infantry Division, which is currently headquartered here. Beautiful Joint Base Lewis McChord. And we're all just hoping there's cake left over for us, but that may not happen.
That all depends on what kind of cake, though.
That's true. But apparently, according to some of the soldiers, it was good cake.
Yeah, what's your favorite kind of cake?
You know what? This is a controversial opinion, but I don't like cake. I don't enjoy it.
I don't think we could be friends anymore.
No.
Well, I think I'm the perfect friend.
Ice
Makes
cream
more
cake.
fun. Yeah, well, I like ice cream. So
But I can understand cake, sort of. You know, I don't completely distrust you now. Anyway, that's a topic for another day. One of the wonderful things is we have recently received funding, and beginning in January, we are going to be updating this exhibit to be able to cover the entire existence of the Women's Army Corps, which was established in 1940 and was not disestablished and women fully integrated into the regular United States Army until 1978. But we want to be able to tell that entire story. And so beginning in January, we're working with an amazing company out of Florida called Atomic Carrots, which hands down is the coolest company name I've ever heard, and they're wonderful folks to work with. So coming soon.
That is awesome.
That is the greatest thing. So we're not going to show any more weapons, but we'll show these tools that were utilized by
During warfare.
During warfare.
These were peacekeeping weapons, or peacekeeping tools.
Well, they would take a piece out of you. What we have here are examples of fully automatic weapons, machine guns, submachine guns. Here's the famous Tommy gun. The original Tommy gun, most people are familiar with, kind of the gangster version, was a very finely machined piece of equipment and thus was very expensive. The U.S. military purchased small numbers, but when war broke out, they needed a less expensive version. This is the less expensive M1A1 Thompson, but it was still kind of pricey to produce. So the government said, we need an even cheaper version. The M3 grease gun.
That looks a lot like the German one.
This is basically a 3-pound bolt stuffed in a tube. In World War II dollars, that cost about 32 bucks. So, and this utterly simple piece of equipment remained in the U.S. Army inventory until the 1990s, simply because for tankers or armored vehicle crew members, you know, the standard M16 was just too unwieldy, so we kept these in the inventory. And I had personal friends of mine who carried this in the Gulf War in 1990, 1991.
it looks like a caulking gun.
Hence the name, the grease gun.
That is actually really scary that in the Gulf War, that's what they were given.
It's a fine weapon. All you have to do is point it in the right time zone, and you should be good to go. One story that I think is so important that began and in many ways concluded here at beautiful Fort Lewis was the story of desegregation in the United States Army. This is our exhibit looking at the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. And this story began with this photograph. And it is a photograph of members of the 2nd Infantry Division, which was here at Fort Lewis in the late 1940s. When North Korea invaded South Korea in the summer of 1950, the 2nd Division here at Fort Lewis was the first stateside division to be alerted and sent to Korea for combat service. Now, up through the Second World War, segregated units grew from those 4 original Buffalo Soldier units to hundreds of them. Now, and they were combat arms, they were support units, they were everything. There's the famous 6888, all-female black unit, the postal unit. The leader, Charity Adams, thankfully Fort Lee, Virginia, which was named after Robert E. Lee, is now going to be renamed Fort Adams after Colonel Charity Adams.
Yeah, in case you're not following that, all the old bases that have Confederate ties in their names, or even their building names, are getting renamed.
And it was part of what we call the Base Renaming Commission. Ironically, apart from Fort Lee, all the other Army bases that are named after Confederate generals are named after not very good ones.
Fort Hood.
Yeah, Bell Hood, Braxton Bragg. I mean, they didn't even get the top 10. Regardless.
What's even more interesting is that my day job as a historian, I actually had to review everything on McCord with the 62nd historian to make sure we didn't have any Confederate ties or otherwise distasteful ties that needed to be renamed.
And this is never...
We didn't, just so you know, we didn't. And McCord is good. Lewis was another story.
Well,
so
it's
his fault.
It is my fault. And that, again, that is an effort to talk about the inclusivity of the Army and the diversity of the U.S. military. It does make it stronger. And that's part of what we talk about here. As I said, we had all of these segregated units. They were all over the Army, but they were never organic to the division, which is kind of the basic combat unit of the Army. So you might have a segregated all-black unit attached, but it was never organic. But this photograph from 1950 confused me because these are all black soldiers. They're all wearing the shoulder patch of the 2nd Infantry Division, and more importantly, the unit guidon that they're carrying is from the 9th Infantry Division, which was not a segregated regiment, or pardon me, the 9th Infantry Regiment, which was not a segregated regiment. These are all from the 3rd Battalion, 9th Regiment. A million years ago, I was a young platoon leader in the 3rd Battalion, 9th Regiment, and had no idea it was ever a segregated unit. Well, fun story. When the Army sort of desegregated after the executive order of 1948, where President Truman said, as of this day, the entire Department of Defense is now desegregated. The Army actively resisted that, and did not officially fully desegregate until 1955. However, they made small changes. And so what they did in a typical infantry division, which these guys would have been in here at Fort Lewis, there are 9 infantry battalions. All of them were white battalions except one. That was the Army's look at, we're going to desegregate. So they made one segregated battalion out of the 9, and it just so happened that the 3rd Battalion of the 9th Regiment was that segregated battalion. So when that regiment and its battalions went to Korea, gets in combat, starts taking casualties, there was not the perfect proportion of white replacements to black replacements to maintain segregation. And so what happens in the first 90 days in combat, the 9th Infantry Regiment, which was a part of the 2nd Infantry Division, desegregates. And then that spreads throughout the rest of the 2nd Division and the rest of the Army. So the Army desegregates in combat because it has to. And there's a whole other story where the Army back in the mid-1990s actually makes a recognition and rights a wrong for a black unit that was discredited and disbanded in disgrace unfairly during the Korean War, and they bring that unit back here at Fort Lewis. In fact, I was fortunate enough to be part of that when my unit, the 3rd of the 3rd Battalion, 9th Infantry Regiment, was redesignated as this formerly disgraced all-black unit. And the great thing was, since this occurred in the 1990s, there were a large number of living veterans who were there to be able to see their regimental honor restored, and it's a really incredible thing. So
If you're just joining us, we are here at the Lewis Army Museum. This is Pretty Gritty Tours live on YouTube. This is the behind the scenes.
Fantastic.
And we're here with director of the museum, Eric Flynn. So if you just joined us, we're now going to talk about this very confusing photo.
Hi kids in TV land. This photograph of this guy opening a tree with a green diamond in it. During the Vietnam War, 1966 to 1972, Fort Lewis was a major basic training and infantry advanced training center. Trained about 500,000 soldiers to be basically trained soldiers or infantrymen. If you were going into the advanced infantry portion of the training, one of the main goals was to prepare you to go to Vietnam. And so there were two, what they called Viet Cong villages, which were built here. And you can see the huts, and they included tunnels, and they included hidden places. And one of them was this hollowed out tree. The green triangle was what the Army used to designate what they called the opposing force. So whoever the bad guys were would wear that or would denote something of the enemy. So like I said, about 500,000 soldiers went through here. About 50,000 of those went through the infantry training portion, and many of those would go and serve in Vietnam. One of the really amazing things to show how the Army has progressed, again, was we had a personnel center, which meant if you were in the U.S. Army and you were going to or coming from Vietnam, you went through here, Fort Lewis, or Oakland Army Base. So well over 1 million Army soldiers transitioned through here. And to show that progression, the Personnel Center prided itself that they could take a soldier coming out of Vietnam, pick them up at SeaTac Airport or McCord Air Force Base, bring them over here to the center, feed them a steak dinner at the Welcome Home Steakhouse, do their paperwork, have them processed, discharge papers in hands, out the front gate in less than 24 hours. Now, for those who are familiar with what it took to come home from overseas combat, World War I could take you months. World War II could take you months. You were at replacement depots, getting on troop ships. Korea, similar thing. In Vietnam, you could go from pulling a trigger, and in 72 hours, you're back in the United States. 24 hours later, you're out of the Army. So it was possible to go from pulling a trigger to being out of the Army, back into the civilian world in less than a week.
Advantages of planes and boats.
Exactly, advantages. So one can imagine the shock that caused to the individual soldier. We have now something called the Transition Assistance Program. The pilot and pioneer program was established here at JBLM. And what that means is up to usually 12 to 18 months before any service member gets out of the service, and that could be a 2-year enlistment or a 40-year career, you can begin to transition out. And they will help you with interview tactics, they'll help you find jobs. They do, there's commercial driving schools. Actually, there's a program with Microsoft that will teach you coding, and Microsoft hires about half the people who graduate from that course. Heck, they will loan people suits or dresses for interviews. So it's a whole support system to help.
I didn't get that.
Just because you didn't deserve it.
That's also at Fort Drum. So.
Okay, well, when I first got out of the Marines in 1991, I think we had a week, and the Marine Corps decided to pull all my wisdom teeth that week. So I spent that week getting out of the Marines totally stoned out of my mind, so it's not like I really remembered much of it anyway.
I basically got a hearty handshake and wished best of luck.
And so we've gotten better.
When did that transition assistance program start to happen? When was that instituted?
Around 2010.
Okay.
It was when we started having large numbers of folks who had seen significant service in Iraq and Afghanistan who were doing we had a transition program that was actually established in the 80s in response to, and it was good, but it wasn't very comprehensive. And so the transition assistance program, in fact, an officer I served with in the Army Reserve, Robin Baker, who is here, she was one of, as a DA, an Army civilian, was the person who really led the establishment of the transition assistance program. And so we had lots of members of Congress, particularly from the Washington congressional delegation, who were integral in getting that program established and up and running. And it really is such a quantum leap over what Evan and I went through.
In truth, I got about a 2-week course of here's how to use LinkedIn.
You remember ATAPs or
yeah.
ACAP?
Yeah, it was ACAP.
Army Career and Alumni Program. And
it wasn't
robust.
bad, but it also wasn't great.
Yeah.
It did link me to the job I have now, so I can't knock it too hard.
Well, and so for instance, one of the things that transition assistance and a greater effort to merge transition. For instance, I'm a truck driver in the Army, and a typical truck driver in the Army can drive all kinds of vehicles. I mean, some of them absolutely massive, but that did not translate directly to a commercial driver's license. Or you can be, I'm a medic, I'm actually a surgical assistant, I've assisted, I've worked in brain surgery and heart surgery, but that didn't translate directly to a civilian qualification. And so what the Department of Defense with civilian industry has done over the past couple of decades has really worked to translate those military skills that are tangible directly to the civilian sector to allow you to more seamlessly go instead of, oh, you did all this in the military, well here, you start at ground zero and get all your licensing and such. And so there's a much better integration between the civilian sector.
We got a sidetrack there.
Okay, all right. This is just an example of if you've been in the military, regardless of branch, you slept here. And it wasn't fun, it smelled bad, and you probably got a cold. So moving into something that really makes Fort Lewis and Joint Base Lewis McChord unique, during the 1980s, the Army experimented with the motorized division concept. Basically, we had units that had tanks and big heavy armored infantry vehicles, or there were dudes like me, what they called light infantry, which is oxymoronic, which meant you carried everything on your back. But we didn't have anything in between. And experience from the 1960s and 70s showed that, particularly in the Middle East, there were a lot of conflicts that were occurring, but they were very short duration, but they all involved tanks and armored vehicles. And the Army looked at it and said, wow, one day we might have to get involved in the Middle East. By the way, I hate to give away the ending, but we ultimately did.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, spoilers ahead. So we didn't have anything that could deploy quickly that had the kind of firepower to actually fight. So they said, hey, let's come up with this motorized concept. So they had an idea, but they didn't have the stuff. There was no cool, lightweight motorized vehicle. So the Army decided to go, well, let's take this idea and see if we can prove the concept with surrogate equipment. So to test the basic motorized idea was they acquired off the shelf, this is a Chenoweth Sandrail, a civilian dune buggy. And it runs off a Volkswagen Beetle engine. They painted it green. And mounted on top would be a TOW anti-tank missile system or a 50 caliber machine gun.
Which is right there.
And the interesting thing about, and it was named the Fast Attack Vehicle. Now, this particular vehicle has no what we call survivability. A gentle breeze and harsh language could knock one of these things out. But that's if you can hit it. They were so fast and so maneuverable, and if you put anti-tank rockets like the TOW system, it was like unleashing a swarm of bees on the battlefield. Meaning, and they proved it over a series of large-scale exercises that these things would knock out large armored formations. So even though they validate the motorized concept, says this is great, the amount of money it was then going to cost to translate that idea into actual, Army specified equipment, by the late 1980s, we were winning the Cold War by outspending the Russians, and we honestly couldn't afford to take this to the next step. So this program actually gets turned off right before the fall of the Berlin Wall. But the idea doesn't go away. So less than a decade later, the Stryker wheeled combat vehicle that we had out front was developed and implemented here at Joint Base Lewis McChord. So when I have Stryker soldiers who come through here and we talk about this, I'm like, this is Dad. Dad may be smaller than you, but he's still tough.
Yeah, and unfortunately,
he's also way cooler than you are.
We'll have to revisit the Stryker because we got suspended from TikTok.
Yeah. By the way, units that had the fast attack vehicle also had the highest re-enlistment and retention rates in the Army because you got to go to work and drive a dune buggy. Duh.
Oh, this is my favorite.
This is outside of the FAV is probably one of my favorite artifacts. This is the last operational Jeep on Fort Lewis. It belonged to the senior general, the First Corps commanding general, a guy named Norman Schwarzkopf. For those of you who are familiar, he was the overall Allied commander during the Gulf War in 1990-91. Everything else on the base had gone to the brand new Humvee. General Schwarzkopf refused to give up his Jeep. And when he changed command in 1987, as soon as he relinquished his command to some other guy, I don't know who it was, we'll figure it out. He drove the Jeep over here to the museum, and here's a photograph of General Schwarzkopf handing over the logbook and keys to Mr. Alan Archambault, the director of the Lewis Museum. Alan ran this museum from 1987 until 2006 or 2007, I believe. An incredible man, really is the guy that really built this museum. And when I came here a little under 8 years ago, and we were in the process of putting in all these brand new exhibits, the Army was kind enough to bring Alan out of retirement on a contract. And so I had a guy who ran this museum for 20 years working for me. Alan was like the wizard. I just wanted to put a big wizard hat on him, and he was the oracle of all wisdom. And we would just kind of go to him and go, how do we do this, oh wise one? So having Alan here for about 2 years was unbelievable. Yes, sir.
Question. This sign says, please do not climb. Is that a suggestion or a hard rule?
I can neither confirm nor deny that
We don't want to get booted off another platform right now.
I'm not saying that there's a photograph of my then 15-year-old daughter sitting in the Jeep, because that would have been wrong.
Well,
Indeed.
I was talking about me and Chris.
And I'm talking about my daughter. This is our Global War on Terrorism exhibit. And what we have is, obviously, you can hear it, sound dampening. We have photos, we have images and video of units here at JBLM preparing for deployment, deploying to combat, mostly in Iraq and Afghanistan, some in the Philippines, and then coming home. We're also going to be updating this exhibit to include the operations of units here at JBLM that are occurring today, particularly out in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, there are photos up here of striker soldiers, of Green Berets, of Rangers, of aviation, all kinds of people. There's several photos of then Staff Sergeant Plumley, who is now Master Sergeant Plumley, being awarded the Silver Star recently. That was upgraded to the Medal of Honor. The good Mr. Muxon here had an opportunity recently.
Yep, Ordine dedicated a Medal of Honor memorial at the Old Soldiers Home Cemetery, where 4 of its 5 recipients of the city of Ordine are resting, and they got Master Sergeant Plumley to come out, and I was very fortunate enough to meet him, shake his hand, and hopefully he promised to call me and email me, but we'll see.
I told you never to call me here. So we have some photos of that. Now, one thing I will point out, there is a photograph that will pop up somewhere of someone being cooler than anyone has the right to be. It's the kind of thing that I'm
How did you get my high school photo?
Okay, second cooler. After over 35 years, I had the opportunity to do some pretty neat stuff. But then I saw this photo, and it's of a guy lying on his stomach, wearing the world's greatest Magnum PI mustache, holding a Glock pistol in his hand, and he's laying prone on the top of a moving train. Behind him is a Philippine Air Force Huey helicopter hovering over said train, and the rest of this guy's Green Beret team are all leaping out of the helicopter onto the train.
While he provides covering
While
fire.
he provides covering fire. Actually, what they're using is, you can tell it's a live training exercise, because the pistol is blue. It fires what's called a simunition round. It's actually it's firing a regular bullet, but the actual projectile is made out of a colored soap. And by the way, it hurts.
Hurts like the Dickens.
And I once got peppered with a whole bunch of those from some friendly Green Berets. Fun fact, that soap freezes. If it's below freezing, they stay solid. So yeah, ow.
Another fun fact is, if you don't go down in a timely fashion that the beret wants you to go down, you will continuously get shot.
They'll keep, it's the shoot till you go down. It's a good time.
In fact, mine said, if you want it to stop, pretend you're dead.
Hey, I rolled over as soon as they shot me.
Yeah, and he also told me dead men don't make noises, so quit crying.
As we come out of the Lewis Gallery, we have this final comparison of then and now. And the reactions we get range from, oh my goodness, look how much the Army has changed, to, oh my goodness, look how much the Army is precisely the same. Being a soldier is being a soldier. Materials and the technology may update, but sleeping on the ground is sleeping on the ground. Okay, we have air conditioned and heated tents, so it can be a little cooler.
That's a little better.
Bit selfish, but is anybody still here on Instagram with me? I don't think you are, but if you are, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, we didn't see this, but these are, to quote the Muppets, boom boom sticks.
Yes. Or to quote Evil Dead Ash Williams, my boomstick.
That's the one I'm most familiar with.
Ooh. Hey.
You medieval screwheads. This is the original safe from when the building we're in was the Red Shield Inn, or the Lewis Inn. It was a hotel that served the military community here from 1918 until the early 1970s, when it was no longer financially feasible to keep it as a hotel, and so luckily it turned into the into our museum. Beautiful, old, safe. During the work, we were redoing all the exhibits. At one point, an electrician decided he wanted to keep his tools safe and locked them in here. Actually had to contact the previous director and go, hey man, you and Buddy Chance have the combination to the safe. And actually, luckily he did. And then we had the actual folks here on the base come over and set it for us, so in case anyone inadvertently locks it again. But it's still perfectly functional.
So you can open it if we lock somebody in.
For example.
If Chris went in there, oh, you're too tall. Oh wait, I'm the one guy that would fit.
Yeah, I know, that's what we're looking at.
This is a temporary exhibit we have, again, on the Women's Army Corps. One of our absolute favorite pieces of this was right here down at the bottom. And it went, this is what was posted outside the women's barracks, referred to as the Whack Shack for Women's Army Corps. And that sign was donated to us by Ms. Alberta Fulmer, who is a Department of the Army employee and actually works up on the 3rd floor for training branch. And Al enlisted back in the 70s when it was the Women's Army Corps. And when they were taking apart the last Women's Army barracks, she thought to pull one of those signs off of the WAC barracks and has hung on to it. And so we are so pleased she donated that to us.
On the Women's Army Corps, what's your favorite story you learned about the Women's Army Corps?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think one of my favorites about, I was going through some installation newspapers from the very early 1970s, 1970, 71, and one of the headlines I saw said, women officers or WAC officers can now discipline men. Which, even though Women's Army Corps officers were officers, I found another one that says...
Well, that's an official government double entendre.
Yes, but thank you. But I had no idea that up until that point, even though they were officers with command authority and leadership authority, they could not actually discipline, in the military fashion, male soldiers. Also found another one that said enlisted men were now required to salute WAC officers. So, and that existed close to the end. And the Women's Army Corps finally went away when attitudes in the public started to change, but also because recruiting of the Vietnam War is over, the draft ends in 1973, so the Army has to go and recruit and make Army life appealing to the civilians. Some of you may be familiar with the "Be All You Can Be" slogan, which, by the way, I just found out the Army is bringing back.
What?
After all these years. So "Be All You Can Be," fed, clothed, employed, is coming back. This is a little better than the Army's first couple of attempts. In 1974, there was "Today's Army wants to join you." And it's like this, yeah.
Okay, there's another one.
Well, and then when they went away from "Be All You Can Be," they went to Army Strong, Army of One, Warriors Wanted, and things like that. All of which is an effort, for old people like Evan and I. Evan and me.
Why are you making him the young one?
Have you seen him?
I'm glowing.
He could be 70 years old and still have that wacky boyish look.
It's true.
It is true.
Mm.
Anyway, so that's one of the reasons that the Women's Army Corps finally went away. And then we see that also that progression of as more opportunities in the military open to women, finally in 2015, all positions, including all combat arms, open to women. I was at a course for new battalion and brigade commanders at Fort Leavenworth a few years ago. And General Mark Milley, who is now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you may see him on TV every now and then. General Milley was the senior officer in the Army at the time, and he came to speak to us. And he, first thing he said is, he stood there, and this was right about the time that the combat arms ban was lifted for women. And he stood in front of all these colonels and lieutenant colonels and sergeants majors, and he just said, "Women in the Army," or "Women in the combat arms." And you felt everyone kind of tense up, and he just said, "Get over it." And he said, "Gays serving openly in the military." The room kind of tenses. He says, "Get over it." Transgender in the military. He says, "Get over it." He says, "If you have a problem with any of these people serving in the military, in the U.S. Army," he says, "get out." So,
Damn.
man from the top, very clear as we have progressed over time. Kind of on a similar thing, this painting was actually done by a local Seattle artist during halftime at a Seattle Seahawks game. In appreciation of Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It stayed at Seahawks headquarters for a number of years, and the Seahawks organization donated it to us a few years ago. This is an original Congressional Gold Medal that was presented to all veterans, Second World War veterans of the war in the Philippines, meaning either Filipinos themselves, non-Filipino American soldiers who served in the Philippines. And we were fortunate enough in the early days of the pandemic to actually hold that ceremony here at the Lewis Army Museum. And we were able to award the gold medals to about 3 dozen surviving veterans or their families. And it was really quite an experience. Yes, sir.
Does that include Jose Colegas?
Yes.
Because I know he was deceased at that point, but he's one of 4 Filipinos to get the Medal of Honor.
His
in World War II.
family member.
Yeah, because I know they're still local.
Yeah. And so we're very happy. One thing we do try and do is during different heritage months, Black History Month, Women's History Month, Pride Month, Asian Pacific Islander. We're currently a Native American.
Which is great because of births.
Absolutely. We really make an extra effort to really highlight those months. And I'll say one thing, the public affairs units, the teams here on the installation are really good. They're real professional. If you get on Facebook and look up the Facebook sites of any of the units here on the installation, from 1st Corps to 7th Division to any of the Stryker brigades, they do a wonderful job of highlighting those.
And the 446 and 62nd on the Air Force side do as well.
Air Force.
Have you heard of that?
Oh, it's a paramilitary outfit. Actually,
I work for
absolutely-
that.
I know, that's
They're
okay.
mean.
Flying Army.
Hey, I just want to point out, Chris,
Yeah.
he promised us there'd be leftover cake.
I heard that there would be something
I
about
didn't
cake here.
promise there would be. Actually, my staff may have spirited some away upstairs. We'll have to see that at another time.
For my part, I'm running out of time right here, so I do want to take this opportunity to thank both Evan with Wandering Historian and of course Eric. Thank you guys both so much for escorting us around here at the museum today. We're gonna have a ton more information about this coming up here soon, but I'm gonna stop my live broadcast
hey,
here in just a second.
If you want to keep going the live broadcast, you can find me on Instagram.
So check it out, The Wandering Historian, there on Instagram. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.